thank you for all you do and your commitment to really trying to make this a better world for all of us. And I think that's really one of the differences that we can talk about between Democrats today and those other people. We really are only committed to this free market notion that the world will be better if it's unregulated and uncontrolled, and that we can rely upon human nature in its most positive form, which brought us the Enron scandal, the debacle with Wall Street, and Countrywide. And obviously we believe that the business of government is people. And we need to keep that in mind, and that people come before profit. That is a message that's very simple. Some would argue that the majority of Americans today agree with that, but when you see the kinds of policies that we're dealing with, when you see in healthcare you have 75% of people want a substantial public option, whatever that definition means, and we can't seem to get enough people in the United States Senate to realize that their responsibility is to the people and not to companies that are motivated exclusively by profit. We have to keep that in mind. So I am here because I have gotten involved with the whole issue of tax reform that came up in Sacramento. You know, we have this slight budget problem in the state. And when people say we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem, they are either living under a rock or intentionally trying to mislead us. We have a revenue problem in the state of California. In 2006, we received about $105 billion into the general fund, which is responsible for dispersing most of the funds that go for providing the goods and the services and the programs that the people of California expect and demand. And this year, if we get to $75 to $80 billion, we will be lucky. So if you do the math, you realize that we have a very, very serious revenue problem in this state. Yeah. After the February budget debacle, Karen Bass, who is the Speaker of the Assembly, announced that she wanted to look at ways to fix our tax system, because after all, it is through taxes that we fund services. And we have to start looking, taxes, you know, is the worst four-letter word in the English language these days. But if you start talking about investment, people want investment. We need to invest. And the way you do that is through financial resources. And the way government gets financial resources is through taxes. And we know that the right wing and the free marketeers who have controlled the dialogue and the politics in the state for many, many years want to shrink government. They want to outsource and privatize just about everything. And we've done that with our military. They're doing that with a lot of the infrastructure development. We're doing that with our prisons right now. They're being outsourced on the theory that if you incentivize by profit, the cost will be less. Of course, what people don't realize is that the profit is the difference. And that when you have government whose function it is to serve the people and not the shareholders or the big CEOs, you realize that that is just a very, very effective argument, but one that is not accurate in any sense of the word. So the goal of the right wing is to shrink government. The best way to shrink it is to not be able to fund it. And that's where we are right now. So Bass said, you know, after this February budget mess, where we really started cutting out services for our most vulnerable populations, our seniors, arguably our veterans, and Mr. Hamby is here trying to work hard to make sure that we don't do that, but also to our students, to our kids. I was just over at the university. They have already, I was talking to a professor there who's had to add a class. He won't get paid for it. But he's teaching classes of 600 students. And these aren't your freshman kind of survey classes. We've got a lot of kids who deserve and want a good education so they can help stimulate the economy by getting good jobs. And we are forcing the tax burden on them. They're about to get their fees increased by another third. And And so what are we going to have in California? We are going to be privatizing our universities. They've done it in Michigan, they're going to do it here. And that does not work. That does not benefit the state of California. So Karen Bass was well aware of this, and she announced that she wanted to set up a committee or commission or a joint committee, usually is the way they do it in the legislature, to study and reform the tax basis in the state, the way we collect money. Well, the governor, not to be denied his moment in the sun, said, no, no, no. What we're going to do is I'm going to set up a commission. I'm going to be the one. And we're going to call it the Commission on the 21st Century Economy. Ooh, doesn't that sound good? Well, he loaded this commission up with his buddies, and he started with a guy named Gerald Parsky. Now, Mr. Parsky apparently is a very charming man, but his politics are to the right of Attila the Hun. He served with the Bush administration, and he also was the chairman of the Republican, either the state committee or the national committee, and he was a regent for the university. And his right-wing politics were absolutely impeccable. So he was announced by the governor to be the one who's going to chair this commission. He also included people on this commission who, a guy named Michael Bosky, who is a member of the Heritage Foundation and actually sits on the board of ExxonMobil. And it goes downhill from there. There are a few people who were appointed by the legislature, one of whom was my colleague and dear friend, a fellow named Fred Keeley. And I was talking with Fred several months ago, and he was talking about how this commission was just railroading through all this right-wing stuff that would give tax breaks to the wealthiest among us, and was talking about and trying to push through a flat tax. Well, on its face, a flat tax sounds fair. Everybody pays a flat percentage of their income in taxes. So if you make $10,000 a year, you pay 10%. That's $1,000. If you make $100,000, you pay 10%. That's $10,000. And if you pay $1 million, if you make $1 million, you pay $100,000. On one level, that just seems fair, except those who have the most should pay the most. That is a progressive tax structure. Because if you make $1 million a year and you're only left with $900,000 at the end of the day, that gets you a lot more buying power than someone who makes $10,000 or even $20,000 or even $50,000. And so this commission, predictably, and I won't go through the machinations of what it did and versus what it said it was going to do, but it was a star chamber, only way to describe it. They put a lot of money into studying this flat tax and something new called the business net receipts tax, which turns out would be a disaster for the state. It would be a job killer, not a job maker. But all of the assets and resources of this commission went into things like the BNRT and also a flat tax. So bottom line is it would cut another estimates of $10 to $14 billion hole in our state revenues. And for those who make $1 million a year, it would save them $109,000 apiece. And if you make $50,000 to $75,000, you will benefit to the tune of $4. $4. But what we lose in goods and services is an enormous cost. So that's the COTC Commission. It was totally rigged from the start. As I mentioned, it was co-opted by the governor, and it would be so terribly regressive, we would not be able to provide the services and the programs and the infrastructure, the education that we need to move California forward and, again, make it the place that creates and invents the future. So what I would like to do with that in mind is talk to you about what I think you might consider putting into your platform. First of all, let me just run through, and I realize I could talk for hours.
I won't let you.
What's that?
I won't let you.
Good, good. So I'm going to break this down into some very basic principles with the understanding that there might be some question or confusion. Taxes put most people to sleep until April 15th, and then they get furious. And you know, rightly so, because we shouldn't be talking about this as taxes we need to start talking about it as investment. So let's start doing it. What are we going to do to invest in the future of California? Well, first we need to establish a progressive tax policy for California, or a progressive investment policy for California, based on certain common goals and principles. And so I would suggest that this be included, and I'll send something too, in the basic principles. We want a system in California that meets the tests of fairness, progressivity, transparency, and stability. And that it must be able to meet the fundamental growing needs of the people of California in a 21st century world and a 21st century economy. And to do that, we have to vehemently oppose a regressive flat tax proposal. We need transparency so that when we hear all this nonsense, we have proof through unbiased economic models that are legitimate and accurate. And the volatility must be addressed. So we have to work with the system we know, but that has to expand the opportunities for revenues while possibly reducing the overall, or increasing the overall possibilities, but reducing the immediacy of a higher bracket, for example, on the sales tax. We're paying now 8.75%. If we would reduce that potentially, but expand it to certain services that now are untaxed. And when people say, oh, there's California taxing things again. When I was in Ohio a couple years ago, my daughter had moved there briefly, and we bought a couch for her, and we were going to have them transport it to her apartment. And at the end of it all, they wrote down a sales tax for the cost of transportation. And I went, wait a minute, what do you mean the tax? They said, oh, absolutely, we tax these services here in Ohio. It's a 4.5% tax, it's not 8.5%, 9%. But recognizing that we are a service economy today. And so we need to look at that as a possibility to deal with the transparency, with the volatility. Progressivity. Look, the current progressive, if you make more, you pay more. You know, people complain, look, why is it the top 1% pay 70% of the taxes? Here's the answer. Because they have 70% of the money. Or more than 70% of the money. They pay it because they have it. And they still end up with a lot more to spend than the rest of us. We need to close corporate tax giveaways. That's probably that should be the easiest of all of these issues to resolve. We gave away another $2.5 billion in tax giveaways in the February budget because we do not have a majority rule concept in California. A 2/3 budget is not majority rule. And in order to get the necessary votes to get a budget, we needed to give away $2.5 billion to the big corporate interests in exchange for nothing. Not the promise of a job, not the promise of additional infrastructure, in exchange for nothing. And over the past decade, we have given $12.5 billion in tax breaks to the biggest corporations in California. $12.5 billion. When you think about that, if we had that money, we wouldn't be in this mess.
Why? Why do we do that?
Because in order to get a budget, we have to make a deal with at least some of the Republicans, and the basis of that deal is to give tax breaks to their people.
Because the corporations own the country.
Well, they certainly have far too much influence, certainly in California. We need to return money and financial control to local government. When you think about after Proposition 13, when with the loss of those property taxes, so much of the power transferred to Sacramento. We need to bring at least a good portion of that back to the local communities. And we have to consider and have a discussion about why it is that commercial property owners don't pay their fair share. So those are the basic issues that we need to talk about. And when we look at, again, we need to emphasize, I think, as part of this discussion, what is the role of taxes and infrastructure in our infrastructure? They are the investment we make in our future. Taxes equal investment. This is for the public good. We need to emphasize the fact fact that we have to put people before profit, and that this is an investment and not taxes. This is to benefit all of us and not just benefiting the few. So we need to look at the 21st century as a goods and services-based economy. We need to consider the fact that electronic and interstate commerce are not forced. They do not play at a level playing field, and as a result, a lot of the retail businesses that we have are going out of business because you pay tax on what you buy at a retail store, but you can go on to Amazon.com and those other places, and there are no taxes. And so we are not competitive. We have to level the playing field for those businesses who support us by providing jobs and providing a tax base for those goods and services that we use locally. And Doss knows this better than anybody as we struggle to try to fund the local goods and the local programs that we offer. We are getting squeezed because we do not have the resources that would otherwise be available. We need to consider a way to change behavior in our use of carbon fuels, and the fact that we have a commitment and responsibility to reduce our carbon footprint, and we need to look at some kind of a pollution tax or a fuel tax that will deal with that. We need to make sure that one of the simplest of the lowest hanging fruits is to require those companies that take our oil that belongs to the people of California, that they pay an oil severance tax for the privilege of stealing our oil. That's a basic one that will bring $1 billion into us every year. We're the only oil drilling state that doesn't do that. Now, final thing, what is the business of government? It is to provide a basic level of human dignity and to create an atmosphere, a constructive atmosphere in which business can work. Our responsibility is to our schools, to our transportation system, to our healthcare system, and to our personal and public safety. Those are the primary responsibilities of government, and to make sure that everyone has a basic level of human dignity. I think that when you look at the tax system, when you look at the investment system in this state and in this country, it is critically important that we keep those principles in mind.